Hello, everyone. My name is Sichamotsielwa. I am from the Speakers Firm. Welcome and thank you for choosing to join the Empower Entrepreneurs Digital Conversations, a COVID-19 discussion hosted by EmpowerWorks. A special welcome to our keynote speaker, Thebe Ikalafeng, founder of Brand Leadership and Brand Africa. We have a broad representation of stakeholders joining us directly via Zoom, and they will post their questions on the chat box at the end of the keynote, and there will be a Q&A that we'll answer. And please bear with us. Sometimes we have a lot of questions, but we'll go through as many of them as possible. To get a direct invite to the next talk tomorrow on the 28th of May 2020 by Muzi Kuzwayo, Director at Artificial Intelligence at Initiative MPZ, please contact our WhatsApp number 082-088-5262, or visit the EmpowerWorks website, where we can also get information around Empower Men, Empower Women, Empower Youth, Speakers Firm, Leadership Summits, and many other events that EmpowerWorks hosts. Tonight, we are live on the following EmpowerWorks digital platforms: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and the hashtag that we follow for these conversations is Empower Entrepreneurs. As I normally say, COVID-19 has changed the world. Thebe, you are the only person that I know that has visited all the 55 African countries. I'm sure you have even been to many more other countries globally. You crossed many national borders before they were abruptly closed by COVID-19. With your talk tonight, you will be reaching a global audience throughout the continent, and many entrepreneurs around the world are trying to find their way in this new reality. What were some of your observations during your travel, Thebe, as you lead into your talk?
Good evening, Sichaba. Good evening, Africa. Good evening, the world. Thank you for the invitation. So good to catch up with this. Sichaba, I always see you everywhere else, but now I get to see you in the cyberspace. People, I get on Instagram all the time, people ask me questions. They say, Thebe, don't you miss your travels? Don't you miss traveling? I said, not at all, because I've been everywhere already. I've been on the road already. I think my last major trip was Antarctica, which was the 7th continent in the world. It was quite an illuminating and probably a good time before this COVID hit, because I came back from Antarctica in January this year. So some observations, I like to group my observations around a few things. So before, obviously, maybe I should give a bit of context in terms of how my mind has just changed over time. Coming from Kimberley, having traveled all the way to Johannesburg, Joburg was my world. So coming to Joburg, my first trip out of Joburg was into America. So that was so it means I skipped the entire continent. Matter of fact, I think we stopped at one place only, and I can't remember where it was, Cabo Verde or somewhere, but just overnight while they're changing petrol, and we moved on within an hour to Belgium into America. So that was my first trip. So I'd never really been anywhere else in the continent. So when I came back to South Africa, 94, I came back to South Africa just before the elections. One of my earlier trips, I think my first trip was Botswana, where my grandfather comes from. And then my next major trip was into Kenya, which I've never been to as well. I've been to Kenya like the rest of us in terms of the Maasais and all those. So that was my reality and my expectation of what Kenya is, what Kenya looks like. So since then, obviously I started brand leadership. I started Brand Africa 2010. And as soon as 2010 was over, I got very anxious about my mindset in terms of where I fit in the world. Because I think a couple of years or so earlier, when I started thinking about setting up Brand Africa as a non-profit to really bring together, to mobilize Africans, to tell the African story, to champion African brands, to just be proudly African. Around that time, I started thinking, how do I fit in? How do I make this real? How do I start talking about a continent which I have never seen myself? Because all I knew about the continent was Kenya, South Africa, and Botswana. But I think I then started moving around. I said, let me just move points here. Let me do something North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. At least I'll have a view of the continent. Once I've done that, once I've been to Egypt, I've been everywhere else. And I was in Ethiopia 2013 with my friend Omar from Tunisia, but he's British-based Tunisian. And we're comparing notes, we're just chatting. And I said, where have you been, Omar? He says, I've been to about 30 countries. I'm like, in Africa. I said, oh my goodness. It gives you a good view of the continent, because when you speak to Omar, my friend, you get a view of, you get a taste of just how African and worldly he was. And I said to myself, I can't have conversations around my continent when at that stage I'd only been to about 15 countries or so. And I said, out of the 55 African member states, I need to get on the road. So then, of course, I went on the road, and in particular, or in earnest, the last 3 years before this, I did pretty much 30 countries or so. I just went on a trip every month or so. I was in somewhere in the continent. I wanted to just go into the country. I wanted to have no agenda. Because, when you arrive at an agenda, your mind is so focused on that agenda, you then forget to see the rest of the country. So I wanted to just travel without an agenda and just go into the continent, just travel, have fun, eat interesting food, see interesting people, go to interesting places, just be free, just be one with them. That's how I did my travels. And most people who follow me on Instagram would know that my trips have no agenda. They're all different. And I wanted to have a bit of fun. I wanted to jump off of an aeroplane in Namibia, above where the sand dunes meet the sea, the only place in the world. I wanted to bungee jump in Victoria Falls. I did that. I wanted to just go inside the pyramids, to go where the pharaohs were buried. I went inside there. I wanted to do interesting things. So when I came back, people asked me, what did you see? And I said to myself, I need to think about what I saw. I know how I felt. Certainly I felt that I was one with them. I felt there was a brotherhood, there was a connectivity. I could see myself everywhere because the first important thing I did and I do when I travel is I leave my country behind. I always leave South Africa at the airport because I feel like it will disturb me in my travels. Because a lot of people, they travel when they leave the country and they arrive in another country, they start missing the things behind. There's a quote I've seen somewhere. They said, if you don't like the people, you don't like the food, you don't like the religion, you don't like the way of life, just don't travel. So I feel the best way to travel for me then, I left my passport behind and I fell in love with everything I came across. If it didn't work for me, I'll figure it out later. If it works for me, we'll also figure it out later. I learned a few things. The few things that I've learned, the first one is war. The wars in Africa are not over. But the most important war that I've seen is the war of food. You know, you go to Kenya, to Nigeria, and they will tell you they make the best jollof. You go to Ghana. I probably spend more time in Ghana than any country in the continent because I think I've been to Ghana over 100 times. I can't even know how many times. You go to Ghana and they say they make the best jollof. You make to Senegal, they say they make the best jollof. You make to Gambia, they say they make jollof. So there's a constant war taking place among Africans as to who makes the best jollof or who makes the best bisap. So there's a war of food, but it's a beautiful war because it's a war that enables you to get to experience the different countries and the cultures, how they make jollof in Nigeria. This is how they make jollof in Ghana. This is how they make it in Senegal. This is how they make it in Gambia. So the war was the most important, beautiful observation. The second thing that was of interest is how we deal with memorials. So when I went to, when I got to Guinea-Bissau, and I was trying to understand a little bit about the Portuguese, what they've left behind, what's Portuguese. And, you know, I met this guy, young guy, 25, became a taxi driver, we said, forget the taxi, let's just drive. Take us everywhere. He took us to some of the places. And then I said to him, show me what the memorials of the Portuguese, what they left behind. I want to see their history, what they were thinking. And he says to me, and we spoke to somebody older as well, he says, we don't have much of those. I said, whoa. And he says, it's so regrettable. He says, because we're so angry after the, getting independence, we just wiped out that memory. So, and I contrasted how we dealt with memorials in South Africa, how a lot of people want to wipe that out. And then I contrasted how the people in Rwanda dealt with the genocide. And I realized the mistake that many of us make is we want to wipe away history. You see, you cannot erase history because, as somebody said before, if you erase history, you are bound to repeat it. So I don't have problems. What I've learned is I don't have problems with seeing Paul Kruger or seeing any of these people. What I think we need to be doing, which is what my observations are and my learnings were, is we need to set up our own memorials, like the Senegalese, who put up the monument, the Renaissance Monument, which is the tallest in the world, taller than Statue of Liberty, spent $50 million on it. It's the highest thing you can think of. It's so majestic when I look at it. And I said, that's what we do. You dwarf the ones you found so that your children and your people who follow you are able to ask questions. Who is that little man? And who's that big statue? You cannot erase history. So I learned that much. Set up your own history, create your own cities, create your own memorials, create your own buildings. The ones that you found, like in Angola, turn it into a memorial so that we can find it and we can tell the story about it. Third one, interesting observation is the concept of time. You know, people always talk about time in Africa and they say African time. But I know African time. I know African time from two areas. I know it from being in Ethiopia, where I've been also probably the second or third most. And I completely got confused when they were talking about when they gave me time, and I was looking at it, the times were different. These people were 7 hours behind me or somewhere. and the calendar was 7 years or so behind ours. I was like, oh, what are you talking about? And I learned the concept of time, our time. Our time, not as in African time, as in being late, but our time as the time that is endemic to us, the time that we created for ourselves, like the Maasais in Tanzania or in Kenya, whose time is 7 hours different from ours. Because I was sitting in the lobby and I was speaking to the concierge, and it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I said to him, what time is the market closing? Because I just want to pick up something there quickly. He says, oh, you got time, 3 o'clock. I'm like, dude, it's 5 o'clock already. He says, no. So he gives me the time that's 7 hours minus where I was. So 3 o'clock me was still coming up. I was like, understanding. Time is different. But most important thing is that we have our own time. We need to arrive in our own time. And appreciation of how historical that moment was as well for me. When I arrived in Cabo Verde, it was quite interesting, the fourth thing I've learned. When I arrived in Cabo Verde, because, we only see in the markets here, people wearing Amilcar Cabral's hat, the knitted one. And I asked, and I remember going to his foundation, and I was asking, that hat, why does Amilcar Cabral always have that hat? They're like, that hat was given, because Amilcar Cabral, if you know, was fighting for the freedom of Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau. And he's buried in Guinea-Bissau. They said that hat was given to him by the peasants in Guinea-Bissau, who out of gratitude for what he's done fighting for the freedom of both countries, they couldn't afford to give him anything else. And they said, we will give you a hat. They said, that's the least we can give you out of gratitude. We never look a gift horse in the mouth. But everything that we used to see, whether it is Kaunda's handkerchief or whether it is Nyerere's collarless shirts, or whether it is, you name them, every single one of, particularly those post-independence leaders, had a certain style, an African style, which was just them. So everything means something. If you remember when Mandela came out of jail, and he went to his first parliamentary meeting or second, whatever, and he went with his Mandela shirts. And they said, I think the NP, the National Party at the time, said, that is not parliamentary. How could you dress like that? That is a disrespect of Parliament. And Mandela said to them, I think at that time, he says, who said that is the right dress? You are undermining how we express ourselves as Africans. So it's understanding that as well, that we have our own style, and you get to see that. And behind our style, there's a reason, there's a meaning. And we get to sit with each one of these people. My times sitting with Kenneth Gowan, and many lunches and dinners, learned a few things. There are things that Africans were very entrepreneurial, but we know that. How as we explain somebody in Nigeria selling at Makola Market, which is, I can't tell head from tail, I can't tell one brand from the other. It is so packed with people, it's packed. But they can tell the difference, and they can tell the customer, and they can tell nobody will come and mess with them and steal something out of there. Because we're a very entrepreneurial bunch. But to me, the mark of entrepreneurship is arriving in Senegal at 2 a.m., driving all the way to the border of Gambia, arriving at the border at 6 a.m., and they said to me, we need insurance to cross over. Insurance to cross over for the vehicle, we don't have that. Some guy there looks like a hustler, picks us around, walks us over, takes us to, he says, come with me. So I go with him in the I can't remember, we took a taxi or one of our vehicles. Oh, in this vehicle, we left ours behind. We go back, and in the middle of the night, at 5:36 in the morning, this guy takes me to an insurance broker who writes the policy for us that hour of the morning. I always think, as a South African, that if I had to ask a South African to wake up at 5:30 to write a policy for me, he would have looked at me and asked me, nobody pays me to do that. But these guys, the rest of the continent, they understand. Very, very entrepreneurial. The other important thing that you get to learn across the continent as you travel is the power of collaboration. You know, I said to my friend TK, I said, TK, let's go to 4 countries in 2 days. He's like, ah. I'm like, let us go to Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia. We're gonna do it in 2 days. He says, how are you gonna do that? I just landed from Mauritius and I called her. I said, we'll go tomorrow morning at 9. He says, do you know anybody there? I said, zip. I said, we don't want to see the people. He said, but who's going to take us to 4 countries? I said, we'll figure it out. Arrive at the border. Arrive at the border in Zimbabwe, Pretoria Falls border, bungee jump border, get into taxi. The one taxi says, don't worry, I'll take you to the border. When you get to the border, someone will pick you up. And then that person will take you to the next border. So afterwards, I then said to the one lady who was taking us around, I said, how do you make money? Do you give him a commission? Because you're always thinking, I need to pay somebody a commission. He's like, no, Thebe, it doesn't work that way. It's like a relay. He passes a customer to me. I make money out of this. I have a customer who needs him. I pass him over to that side. So that's how we do it around our region. So that's how we all make money along the way. It's like, wow, the power of collaboration. When we talk about opening borders and all those, that's what's going to be interesting. You know, I was watching yesterday my 7th observation. I was watching yesterday when the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, about 2 days ago, when announced that we can. Okay, I don't drink, so for the alcoholics, it was a good idea when they had alcohol is going to be free. They were excited. But the religious people, when they had 50, so every time I hear religion, I'm like, oh my goodness, they are so relieved because now finally we can go to church. So they can go to church and they can pick up the tithes, those who are into the business of tithing. And my one friend, and it just brought to memory just the power of religion in the continent, how we are so consumed by the belief in the afterlife or the one above. Which sometimes I wonder whether it is spirituality or it is religion as a membership. So when you go to West Africa, which is survey, they indicated that about 95 to 98% of West Africa, of Nigerians and Ghanaians, believe in God and believe in some church. Understand it. I see it on TV every weekend. Because when you ask somebody in Ghana, how are you? The response will be, by His grace, I'm doing well. The 9th observation, or the 8th observation around my travels is really just the ingenuity of Africans. You know, when you go to Sudan, which has got more pyramids than Egypt, when you go to Egypt, which has got the more majestic pyramids maybe, and you look at that and you say to yourself, how do they do that? They didn't have the cranes we have. We have cranes. We can't even build a proper school. We have so much cement, so much, we can't do things right. They did it all. Yeah, we understand there was probably some slavery at some stage, some broken buildings, some dead people who died doing this. That is a part that obviously is not worth remembering, or rather worth celebrating. But still the ingenuity of saying, I'm going to build a pyramid. And those pyramids are a monument to African ingenuity for me. That's why paper comes from Egypt and it's used everywhere else, from the papyrus tree. The 9th point, probably penultimate point, I can't even read my own handwriting because I wrote some notes so I can remember. I can remember these things. Money. So what's so interesting? I was in Burkina Faso last year, and I joined a protest. And it's just fun. So I don't want to get into the wrong country, in different people's countries. I joined a protest, and they were protesting against the CFR, the French money. And you get to understand how the power of money. But you know what's more interesting about money for me is in my trip in Mogadishu. Being in Mogadishu, I was in my car with my security and my friend driving, and they stopped us. The security stopped us and they said to my friend, do you have money so I can buy a cigarette? I'm thinking, money for a cigarette. And the guy just took his phone and he just went out with his phone, clicked through. I was like, clicking through with so I'm thinking, I said to him, what did you just do? He says, I just gave him money. I said, what do you mean? He says, I just gave him a code. I said, but they only want to buy one cigarette. He says, my friend, here in Somalia, 95% of us use mobile money. Countries are much further than many of our countries. But the power of what money means and how money is used in different places. Finally, perhaps more interesting or more down the road for me or what I do, brands. I was driving in Eritrea, which is outside of Ethiopia. I was driving in Eritrea, and we drove for 2-3 hours. Eritrea is interesting because it's a very clean country. Very few brands in the streets. The streets are not littered. The country is very clean. Very clean. I mean, Asmara is a World Heritage City. A World Heritage City. So it means the whole city as it stands there is a World Heritage site. And throughout the 2.5 hours driving from Asmara to the next biggest city, to Massawa, there was only one brand, Coca-Cola, an old Coca-Cola billboard. And I said, I understand now why in our survey, which we do every year at Brand Africa, Coke has been the top brand for so many years. Those are perhaps my most important observations around the continent. But my most important observation around the continent is that we, as South Africans, perhaps need to understand how we connect to the rest of the continent. It's probably what the great Nigerian singer Fela Kuti once said, I must identify with Africa, then I'll have an identity. That's what consumes my energies and my mind, to at least be part of the generation, or at least the end part of the generation that recognizes the beauty of our continent.
Thank you very much, Thebe. Yeah, you talk about the beauty of our continent, but as we know, brands are huge, and brands dominate a lot of what we do, our spaces. Have you been following brands, and to what extent are brands enhancing what Africa is or diminishing what Africa is?
Oh, it's such an interesting question. Well, have I been following brands? Well, my whole life has been about brands. From my 6 years as running the marketing for Nike for the continent, and my 18 years running brand leadership, helping countries and companies and politicians build brands across the continent. It's all I do for a living. So my observations, so I try to also narrow my observations into a more systematic way. And that's why 10 years ago I created Brand Africa, Africa's Best Brands, because I wanted to have a metric to see how Africans are doing across the continent. And the survey the results which we just launched now, those who enter can see at brand.africa, which we just launched now, you will see in the survey that only 13% of the brands that Africans admire are African. So out of the top 100, only 13% of the brands that Africans admire. So I'm very concerned about that. It concerns me as an African that as Africans, we don't support Made in Africa.
Sure. Why do you think that is the case?
I think it is 2 or 3 things. First off is a lack of confidence in who we are. So if you have confidence in your country, in your people, in your history, in your culture, you will support things from it. Now, I think you remember, so that's one. Let me finish your comments and I'll come to an example. That's one. Second is, I think we like validation from outside. We don't like, so we think to have arrived is to have been everywhere else. But to have arrived is to be home. With the people, the country, with the culture, with the heritage. That's having been to arrive. I'll use an example I've been using quite a bit lately, maybe 2 examples. One is how my Xhosa Laduma from my Xhosa, how he said, let me take my culture, a sensitive part of my culture, which is of my culture, which is initiation, how we celebrate it. Let me translate that and share it in a more broader way. Not obviously, and he created his Maxhosa brand 10 years ago. So I think that's beautiful because now Maxhosa is available as a luxury brand. You get to see it everywhere else in the world. I'm sure in times in the future, this will be one of those brands where if it becomes more accessible to the rest, where we'll get to see it in our list and many other lists. But the one that to me sets the example of what I mean about confidence in who we are, about not about seeking validation, has to be Tshepo brands, Tshepo jeans. Do you know when Tshepo, remember last year when Tshepo launched the jeans, there was a furor around the country. And people were saying, I am not going to be wearing Tshepo jeans. I know the dude, he grew up in a township in Tsakane. Why would I wear a jean called Tshepo besides? So I'm not going to pay 800 rand at that stage, 800 rand for that jean. It's interesting thing to me, and I said to Tshepo, and I posted it as well on the Instagram at that stage or in Twitter at that stage. I said, but we're very quick to buy Louis Vuitton. Have we met him? Do we even know where he comes from? Do we know what he stands for? We're very quick to go buy Giorgio Armani. He lives in Italy. He's probably in his 80s now, still alive. We're very quick to wear Pierre Cardin. He died of 30 years ago from Paris. But we don't want to wear Tshepo jeans because we say he's local. We know him. And why would I buy something like that? But what was more interesting was when the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, came to South Africa and he bought Tshepo's jeans and he bought for Archie as well. And just prior to that, we had what you call the Global Citizens. At Global Citizen, Caspar Nyovest decided to perform in Tshepo jeans. The next few weeks after that and after the Duchess, people are now flooding Tshepo. Where are the jeans? We need to wear Tshepo jeans. So no bloody wonder Tshepo doubled the price and we're still buying them. And it should have doubled the price because it was cheap in the first place. So now all of a sudden, we appreciate Tshepo for two things. Only because some Duchess validated him and some global citizen with some artists validated him. We shouldn't be waiting for that. Now, all of a sudden, we say, we should be buying Maxhosa. We should learn how to say Maxhosa because we've learned how to say Hermes and we've learned how to say Louis Vuitton and all those things. So it should be easy for us to say Maxhosa, to buy Tshepo, because when we say that, it means we are supporting our own. So when you look at the list of the most admired brands out of Africa, you then notice that only MTN, DSTV, Ethiopian Air, Glow, Azam out of Tanzania. Those are some of the few, Dangote, those are some of the few brands that are coming out of there. That's only 13. But so to me, that's the concerning part of my observations around the challenges that we face and why we're not supporting our own.
Okay. And I thought the team that I support is one of the biggest brands in Africa, and you don't mention it. Skawa. There's only one big team in South Africa and in Africa, so let's leave it there. Of course.
Kaizer Chiefs.
Yeah.
No, but Kaizer Chiefs is Nike. I grew up with Kaizer Chiefs. I'm a Kaizer Chiefs fan. Go ask Kaizer Motaung, he'll tell you. The first contract for Kaizer Chiefs I signed. Don't forget, I signed that as that was my last Nike. The right thing I did in my last job at Nike was to facilitate the signing of Kaizer Chiefs contract to Nike. And they're still standing, and I'm still here 18 years later. So no, I'm a Chiefs fan. But we're talking about brands. The number one brand in the continent that's most admired by Africans is Nike. So that's also phenomenal. Because when people ask me when I do these interviews, why is Nike so successful? Why is Nike number one in the continent? It's an American brand. Well, Nike sponsors Bafana, sponsors Nigeria, the two powerhouses in the continent. Nike sponsors Casta. So Nike stood with Casta and Casta's fight against ICC and everybody else. You look at what Nike has done as well with Starboy, what's Wizkid in Nigeria. signing up WizKid, collaborating on a brand with WizKid. You look at what Nike has done with Eliud Kipchoge from Kenya, supporting him to break the sub 2 hour. So that's why Nike is number one in the continent. But we don't have to talk about the work that I did in the continent for Nike. That's for another chapter.
Sure. What I'm going to do, because there are quite a number of questions that want to engage you, is I'll switch off my video so that I can come closer to the screen and read the questions, unless if you want to read them yourself.
Shaba, both of us, we've entered the age of reading questions and messages. So let's see when we can't see the questions so easy.
So acknowledge the name of the person who posted the question and then read it.
So there's one from Semi Tamsanga. Semi wrote a whole textbook. Thebe, when we are delivering a world-class rebranding campaign for the Northern Cape, he wants to know when we'll be delivering a world-class rebranding of the Northern Cape. Semi, you're right. Semi, we need to talk. I agree with you. Then there's one from Zolisi Magalima. It says, what is the most important message you can give to an entrepreneur who's starting their brand? What are the 3 things that they should do? Very interesting question, Shaba. It says, the most important thing that as entrepreneurs are building brands that we suffer from is because is one thing that we need to know about when we're building brands. Is all great brands are one, solve a problem. No brand just exists. Whether the problem is emotional or it is functional or it is whatever or transformational, every brand must solve a problem. And that promise, that solution must be clear. So you must say, this is what I do. Mercedes-Benz solves the problem of saying what an executive does. It's the best or nothing. Or Volvo says the problem I'm solving is the problem about safety. Is that our brand only focuses on safety. So there must be clarity. The second thing that all great brands do, and which we struggle with as entrepreneurs and all those, is differentiation. You can't be copying other people, doing what other people are doing. So it's quite interesting, actually, now. People are fighting each other about face masks. Who came up with the face masks first? Whose face mask looks like who? So the only reason that fight is taking place is because perhaps there is a lack of clarity, a lack of differentiation. You must be differentiated. You must be different from other people. Because if you're not differentiated, because they say, Michael Porter, who is authority on competitive advantage, a book he wrote 30 years ago. He says competitive advantage is about being different, not about being better than the other person. So we need to understand the question of how better are we, how different are we from other brands. To me, the other third. So the first one is about it's about focus, being clear about what you stand for. Second one is about differentiation. The third one is about consistency. You have to be consistent. You have to be consistent. You can't be here, there, tomorrow. Because you see, we learned something about consistency from a brand like Coca-Cola. When Coca-Cola in 1983 decided to change the formula and they called it the New Coke, the customers revolted. They said, you will bring back the real thing. Coca-Cola's share price, I think, went down by 30 points. Pepsi overtook Coca-Cola. I think within 3 months or so, they went back to their own Coke. They said, we are back the way you want it. So you have to be consistent. But I think as entrepreneurs, the biggest thing is patience. It takes time to build a great brand. It takes time to build a great brand. We gotta be patient. It takes time. We have to build a brand the way a bird builds a nest, one strand at a time, slowly and surely. That's how you build a great brand. So those are sort of some of the fundamentals of really how to build a great brand over time. You must solve a problem, and the problem must be clear. You must be differentiated. You must be consistent. You must be patient. You must be patient. It takes time.
I guess maybe you might be able to have answered what Fifamule Leki on YouTube is asking. So he's asking, how do you develop personal branding as a young person? And then the next question is, what are the opportunities in Africa for which you can encourage young leaders to take advantage of? This is FIFA on our YouTube channel.
Can you say again? The first question, how do you build a personal brand?
personal brand as a young person, and then the next one is about what opportunities do you encourage young leaders to take advantage of?
Do you know, I've learned the same thing about personal branding. It's pretty much the same, I feel, the same principles, isn't it? Because the same principles about personal branding also means who are you, what do you stand for. But I like to use a simpler way when I talk about personal branding. Is growing up in a township, when you're in a township and somebody says, do you know Thebe? And so maybe I use a bad example by saying, do you know Thebe? Because when you say, do you know Thebe, they're going to ask, the branding guy or low vulibutu. So it means you must be clear about something. But the other question, maybe I could ask the same question differently in terms of how we do it in a township. When somebody says, do you know Sichaba? They will say, Onje udumengani Sichaba. So in other words, who is he? What does he stand for? Why should I know him? What difference does he make in the world? What difference has he made in the world? Why should I know Sichaba? So it's that important thing I spoke about, which is clarity. In other words, your positioning. So you must be well positioned in the world, in your world, however big your world is. Because my world is the continent, right? And the world, of course. So if you ask around the continent, they say Thebe, they probably have a view who I am. So it's about clarity. That's the first thing. You have to be clear. You have to be well positioned about a brand. But the most important thing as well about building a personal brand as well is every single brand. First is clear, as I said, it's also consistent. You have to be consistent because when you ask about this, we say, you can't put your finger on him. That's consistency. So they said you must be consistent. We must know as a young person building a brand, what do we come to you for? And if you're building that brand in your corporate as an entrepreneur, people need to know when you want something, a certain thing, who do you go to? That's so. Why do we go to you? Then the third important thing to me is to also understand that everything you do brands, and everything around you brands you. So what I mean is, whether it's how you present yourself, whether it's who you associate with, whether it's how you dress, whether it's how you speak, whether it's everything brands. So you understand that, you then will do the most important thing, is you will then sit back and understand your words and look at yourself and look at what you say, how you say it, when you say it, who you with, where you go, what you do. Are they all connected? Is there consistency around that word? So that's how you build a personal brand in its simplest way.
And just following up on that.
Coming out of COVID, if there is a big challenge, it's going to be how we differentiate ourselves as individuals in order to get the jobs which are now not available anymore, or in order to get the opportunities as entrepreneurs, which are going to be limited. So personal branding will be quite important.
And then let's just close that one, because he did ask to say, what are the opportunities in Africa which you can encourage young leaders to take advantage of? When they say Africa, I hope when they say Africa, they mean Cape to Cairo. Because there's a tendency as well in South Africa, when you say Africa, people are thinking anything but South Africa. When Africa is Cape to Cairo. If you go to a country like Kenya, where they have distinguished themselves with M-Pesa, which has moved from moving access to financial services from 5% to 10 to 70% in the space of 4 years, technology is being quite important. In that you look at Rwanda, which is a country of only 10, 12 million people. In Rwanda, they have positioned themselves as a technological hub of the continent, or they want to take that leadership role. So the opportunities that are available out there is now, as an African, you now need to ask yourself a question, because COVID has done something to the rest of us, unfortunately. Is all of us are now saying, we're like, I haven't been in my car for 60 days. I haven't gone to shopping for clothes that I like for 60 days. I haven't been to my favorite restaurants. I haven't seen my favorite friends. Do I need them? Do I need any of those? Because I haven't needed any of it.
But the one thing that has connected you to all those, whether it is to deliver your favorite food now, or whether it is to do something, is technology. So the number one thing, we're a little bit behind anyway in the world with that. We shouldn't be, because we're living in a digital space. So the most important question that we should all be looking at, one is, what can we do with technology? But the number one, I think, opportunity that African entrepreneurs face is how to create made in Africa brands that speak to our tastes, that speak to our identity. Because think about it, during COVID, what's happened? We've all been on Instagram baking magwenya, eating papa, eating and all those. That's what we've survived with. We survived with our own. And when the government and everybody has been giving people food packages, it has been of African basics, South African basics. So the basics are still the priority. Because most of us like to go far before here. They say charity begins at home.
Okay, thank you very much, Thebe. Let's get back onto the chat box and start with what Reverend Ngwenya is asking. So I'll ask
Reverend doesn't ask me when last I went to church. Reverend will have a problem. But what did the Reverend say?
In your view, is a united Africa realistically achievable? If yes, how? If no, why?
Is what achievable?
United Africa. Realistically achievable.
Well, I've been to every country in the continent, and I've traveled around each part, and everywhere I've gone, people have asked me what is the common thing around that. And the common things I've seen is our resilience as people. But as somebody who makes much with little, our creativity as people. Of course, the United States of Africa is achievable. It's achievable because as Africans, there are common traits among us. But what makes Africa a beautiful continent is the diversity of the continent, whether it is country by country, tribe by tribe, culture by culture, region by region. That's the beauty of this continent. That's the glue of this continent. The glue of this continent is a lack of that monotonous, homogeneous view of the continent.
Thank you very much. There is a continent that has come into Africa, the whole continent. So,
China.
Can you share your observations on how China has penetrated Africa? What are your views on China's presence in Africa?
You know, China has been good to the continent, but also has been bad to the continent. So let's look at the good parts. And the good part, I will use an old, much older person I know in Kenya. What's Chris' last name? I forget his last name. But he's a very accomplished, very successful, wealthy businessman. And the Kenyans were complaining that the Chinese were coming to Kenya and building roads. And he said, and I remember that because I was hosting him in Kenya. I was hosting in Kenya, announcing the top ends there. He said, you Kenyans are busy here complaining about the Chinese building the roads, which they are finishing in 3 years, a year or two. You've had 30 years and lots of wasted money, stolen money, which we have no evidence of. And there is no evidence of the road that you've built. So, because of corruption and many other corruption, which is a problem of the continent. It's a Kenyan problem, it's an African problem. From Cape to Cairo, we know what is done here. And that's why we've got a state capture commission taking place. So in the good way, the Chinese have come, they've built those things fast. Of course, you go to a country like Botswana, they'll tell you they took forever, or the quality of the airport in Botswana was not what they paid for. So on the one hand, they've been good in that they've helped us to fast track our infrastructure build program, but sometimes at the cost of the quality, because the quality hasn't always been great. Of course, they built the African Union head office, which is quite regrettable that as Africans, we couldn't build our own head office. On the bad side is, don't forget, we are incredibly indebted to them, as in literally indebted. They probably will come in and roll roads, take away those head offices, take away this infrastructure if we cannot pay them, because we cannot afford to pay them back now. So we are sort of enslaved in many ways to them. So the China problem in Africa is a win-lose argument for us. But the people to blame about all this are the leaders we put in place, the leaders we put in charge. Because, the mistake that we've made as Africans is we have not brought in leaders who are public servants. We've brought in leaders into power, not into service. So as a result, when you bring somebody into power, they are going to have dominion over you. But you bring them into service, they're going to serve you. We are supposed to be in power. And the people we call presidents and ministers and MECs and all those are supposed to be servants to us. They are supposed to be on assignment from us to go deliver the goods. But some of them have not done a great job across the continent. More of them actually have not done a great job at all, from Cape to Cairo. Instead, they've gone in there in power. We now have to obey them. We now have to move out of the roads when they get on the roads, because they are the kings and queens. We now have to move aside when they walk. We now have to call them names like Honorable, Your Excellency, and all those. We are the excellencies. We are the honorables, because we are the ones who hold the power. That is the challenge we have. So the Chinese have seen that weakness. They've seen the weakness in our people, that in many times our people from Cape to Cairo, they would rather take the Chinese contract, because sometimes the Chinese contract comes with a little sweetener. But sometimes the Chinese contract comes in because our own people are not doing their own job. The Chinese have seen the opportunity. That's why they've painted the continent red. China is present in 53 of the 55 countries in the continent with economically. America is present in about 49 or so countries in the continent with the military. We're not in charge of this continent. We are just bystanders in our own home.
Thank you for that. And I guess the question that Khatili asked about how do you build brand survival strategies during COVID-19, some of those principles hold. I just want to acknowledge that question. Let's take it at a granular level. Lebogang says, thank you, that this is an opportune time for entrepreneurship. But how do we get our government to believe that they can leave businesses to entrepreneurs, and they focus on encouraging that the policies that they make are pro-entrepreneurship for economic growth? You might give it a 30-second step.
Well, I think the previous point I made is quite important. One is we need to remind them who's in charge. We need to assert ourselves. We need to hold them to the contract, and our contract is the vote that we signed with them, and we need to remind them that. But we don't do a good job of that because we've now been turned into servants instead of the masters. That's one. But two, I think our government knows that now. Our governments, not just because I speak Pan-African, I don't speak from a South African perspective only. I think our governments know that because post-COVID, we've learned a few things. Post-COVID, we are going to have to start thinking internally. Nobody is going to be able now nobody's going to be able to, from our perspective, to be able to travel, to export, to do so many things. So we're going to have to start thinking internally. And thinking internally, the government does not own factories. The government does not own, the government only owns two things. One, they've got the bank or the mechanism to collect money from us. And second, they've got the pen to write and the brains to write the policy. We need them to create policies which enable us to do our thing, so that we can create jobs and sell products and make money and give them the money, so we can take the money and build better roads, create better open schools for us, and give us the public goods we require. and serve our people better. You know, the challenge with us continent, South Africa, let me go to South Africa for 1 second where I live, is we've got 17 million people on social security. I think a large number of them, they deserve to be there, and we should understand it. And it's our job, our responsibility to look after those who cannot look after themselves. But it is also on the one side quite a difficult reality to understand. So if we have to pay for the dole for 17 million people, we need to work harder. And the best way that the government will be able to raise that money to do that is if they make the opportunity, if they create policies which enable us to create good opportunities, good businesses, good brands, and we use those, then we make more money for the government. And then we're able to look after our own. So otherwise, if we're looking after 17 million people, and we are not generating money now. As you know, I think we're 200-300 billion behind our targets for SARS this year, probably more actually. If we're behind, how are we going to afford to pay for these 70 million people who cannot look after themselves? And it's our responsibility to look after themselves, because those people are our mothers, our fathers, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our mothers. They are our younger brothers and sisters, our cousins, our aunties who are perhaps disabled and cannot find work, or so many other things. We need governments that understand that. Cape to Carol.
Can Sina ask a question, and I'm hoping that you can link it to the answer that you have just given. Given the challenges of seeking affirmation for African brands, how can branding and brands be used to change mindsets for advancing African pride and African businesses?
Well, I mean, I think I've answered the question already. I mean, I've used Maxhosa as an example of African pride. But I've also used Dangote out of Nigeria, which is quite interesting because we know the guy, right? We've seen his face. He looks like us. He comes from us. We buy his cement, his maize meal, his oil. So part of building pride is when you begin to see Africans building great brands. You know, MTN, I think MTN was started by by Motlana and many other people in 1993, 94 or so. So these brands, so when we know the histories of these brands, which is quite important, I think the one challenge we have is a lot of people don't know the histories of our brands, especially the African brands. If we know the histories of these great brands, we are in a good position to be able to tell a story that will build pride in the future. That people says, oh my goodness, if Dangote can do this, if Elumelu can start United Bank of Africa, UBA, if the Motlanas could have started MTN, if they start knowing those stories, they then will say, so us as Africans, we're capable. Us as Africans, we must take pride in who we are. You know, Fela is amazing. Fela Kuti, the late Fela Kuti. You know, when I went to his house and his shrine in Lagos, it's quite interesting. Because you're so taken up by all that, and he said something quite interesting. And he said when they asked him why are his kids named Femi, Feyi, all those, and he says, you know, as Africans, we must identify ourselves with our cultures, our countries, our names. Our names must be who we are. They must be African names. He says because as an African and you are out there in the world and you win an Oscar, your name is Thebe Ikalafeng, you're a fabulous actor, you win an Oscar in America, or you win DNAD in London for design, or you get the Golden Lion in Cannes in France, and they say, Thebe Ikalafeng. He says, without saying much, when people see the name Thebe Ikalafeng, they will say, Thebe is a Tswana Sotho name, so they will come from Southern Africa. He says our names and all those will ring pride and identity of who we are around the world. So that's why, you know, one of the ways that apartheid was very successful in is telling our mothers and fathers that we need English names. And when we go to school, they say to us, they call us with our English names. But what is most difficult is even us now, when we have children and we're in our 20s and 30s and 40s, we have children, we speak English to our children at home. And then when you ask when we ask each other, why are you speaking English to a child? They say, oh, the teacher says you must speak English to the child because the English would be so good. And I said, that's quite weird. Because we grew up in townships, speaking Setsonga, and we came to work and we speak English. We did that quite fine. So why would they not work for our children? So that's why our children don't reject Africa, because we help them to reject Africa because we don't build pride in who we are at home. And when our friends say to them, oh, I can't say Shishaba is so difficult. And we say, oh, just call me Sech. And then, and they don't understand that if they call us a Chava, you are then able to explain to them, why am I called a whole nation?
Yeah. I want you to, you've got less than 3 minutes. I want you to take a very practical national duty question, and then let's take it outside of national. Sabelo, Mbuku is asking, in one word or many, maybe, Thebe, how will you go about positioning the sector education training authorities in South Africa as a brand?
That's a difficult question. I think that I can't say that in one word, but what I will say for certain is that there's a problem with our education. We know that. After 25 years, we should have gotten rid of the past and built something better in the 25 years we've been in charge. There's a problem with our education period because our education, unfortunately, has not helped transform the problems that we have. Because the problems that we had with our education is that our education was training us to become gardeners and to become tellers and to become servants and waiters and all those things. We should have changed this education to help us to create and build countries. So from a positioning point, it's actually a transformation to transform. I don't understand the whole idea of math literacy because as I always say to people, math literacy sounds like it's mathematics good enough for you to be able to count change when you're selling Magwenya.
Sabelo and I will continue to engage you. We are not satisfied with your answer. The next question is, Thebe, African Union 2063 vision is our last hope. What is missing on it? And if you can use this minute to wrap up, because we are really on time now.
It is not our last hope. The AU 63 vision is about building a prosperous, integrated and united Africa. That's sort of the three words, I guess, around that AU. I don't think it's a last hope because those words, we can always aspire to keep building on those words. But the most important thing in closing is to remember what Mandela said. If we cannot reach this goal, is not to stress about it because it doesn't matter really how often we fall and how many mistakes we make. What matters is how we get up. And how we rebuild from that. Because, I think Les Brown said it once. He says, if you fall, try and fall on your back. Because if you can look up, you can get up.
Thank you so much, Thebe, for your wisdom and everything that you do as a person and for Africa, for the continent, and for humanity. And your words of wisdom, I'm sure, will resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs that were listening tonight. I really appreciate your input. And tomorrow's talk is with Muzi Kuzayo, Director of Artificial Intelligence at Initiative, MPZ. And you can go to 082-088-5262. I would like to thank everyone that joined us live on all our digital platforms. And a big thank you once again for Thebe taking time to stop on this digital platform, which is possibly the 56th country because everything is gone digital now. And good night, everyone. Really appreciated you taking time, and bye-bye. Thank you.